I don't do very many webinars. I don't really know why I don't. I just don't. And so I just decided that now was the time. The good news in the middle of all the bad news is that we are here. We're healthy. We can't be together, but we can be together in this way, which is basically the only way that any of us have to be together right now. So I decided to do this because there came a point around the middle of March, just like everybody else that's on this webinar, where everything just kind of stopped. And I remember being at the Biltmore estate. I think it was actually on March 14th, and my husband and I were out there looking at the tulips and, you know, just enjoying the world. And we knew that it was going to close at 5 o'clock that day. And it just, I don't think it really hit me then, but it hit me probably in a week that it was like, oh my God, where is the end of this? And so, you know, I don't know about y'all, but I just kind of curled up on the couch for about 2 weeks and I didn't do anything. And one day my husband, Dan, looked at me and he's like, this isn't like you. I was like, I know, because if you know me at all, you know that I'm a go-getter. I keep moving, and stopping is not really in my vocabulary. And so I just was like, I got to do something. And so my coach suggested to me that maybe this was a good time for me to like do a webinar and to show up for you guys and to just talk to you about what's going on and give us a place to connect, because I know that's something that we're all really craving right now. And I have a private Facebook group called the Hormone Harmony Club, and a lot of you are in it. And, you know, one of the questions I asked last week was, what are you craving the most? And one of the things was connection. And so, you know, we may be a bunch of strangers. I see a lot of faces here that I actually know and have talked to in the past, and that makes me really happy to reconnect with you. And so, you know, I hope at the end when we have Q&A that you'll feel comfortable, you know, asking questions, talking to each other, you know, whatever it takes. This is, I'm presenting the webinar, but it really is for you. So one of the things that I noticed, and I do want to back up, I want to say, if you are on the front lines, if you're working on the front lines of this, I have a lot of pharmacist friends, some of them are here, or if you are working in a grocery store, or you're a nurse or a doctor or a first responder, or anybody who's having to be out and put yourself at risk, then thank you. I can't imagine what that is like right now. And how scary that must be, but I just want you to know that me and my community really, really appreciate your efforts on our behalf. So thank you. So I was reading the internet one day, and it was probably something on Facebook, and it was Gwyneth Paltrow talking about how we should all maybe take this quarantine time to write a book or learn an instrument or a language or learn to code online or draw or paint or, you know, whatever, which if that's your thing, that's great. But as somebody who could, you know, barely get herself off the couch to go get a cup of coffee, I was kind of like, do we really need somebody to tell us that we should be taking this golden productivity opportunity and doing these things? And like I said, if that's your thing, that's great. I don't have the mental bandwidth right now to really attempt to do something like that. So if you do, good for you. And I wish I had the time to learn Italian right now. So what I was able to do is put together this webinar. So I decided to call it the Resilience Reboot. And so what we're going to talk about today is how our body responds to stress and why that can erode even the most resilient of us. I thought I was one of those people, but I'm not sure anymore. We're going to talk about some immunity boosting lifestyle tips and supplements. And then we're going to spend some time talking about your thinking and how small changes in that can really make a difference in the way you experience what we have left of this quarantine time. And at the end, I'll be offering you an opportunity to participate in a 4-week class with me, where we'll take a much deeper dive into these topics, and we'll have exercises and, you know, ways to help make it stick. And, you know, if that's not something that you're interested in, that's fine, but you'll still come away today with plenty of tips that you can try. So the first thing I want to talk about is what stress does to us. And I don't know how this picture makes you feel. I know that it makes my heart start to race and fills me with a feeling of dread and like I want to run away, because I've had this in my rearview mirror before, and it's not fun. So when I see this, I know what is happening, and that is that the stress hormones, our fight, flight, or freeze hormones, are kicking in. And so we have 3 main stress hormones. Adrenaline and norepinephrine are the 2 that are made like instantly, and they go away fast, and they give us that rush of energy. And so when you're seeing that police car light in your rearview mirror, that's actually what you're feeling, is those hormones that get dumped immediately. And then cortisol is a hormone that's made in your adrenal glands, and it takes less time to dissipate. And so what happens under chronic stress is that cortisol tends to build up and build up, and our bodies really weren't meant to operate that way. And so that can lead to a lot of chronic diseases. So the adrenaline and the norepinephrine are basically reabsorbed by your body really quickly. The cortisol, not so much. And that's why when it builds up, it can lead to all kinds of chronic diseases like diabetes, high blood pressure. It's inflammatory. It really, really screws up hormone balance. And I know most of you are in that age range where hormone balance is something that you're really interested in. And it also can lead to rapid aging, and has some pretty significant effects on the gut, as well as over time suppressing immunity, which is not something that anybody wants to have happening right now. And then there's the emotional side of it. So we've got the physical side that I just mentioned, and then we have the emotional side, and that can manifest itself as anger or mood swings, over the long term, depression, and then lead us to numb our feelings with behaviors that aren't productive either. So up in the drinking of wine, online shopping, endless scrolling on Facebook. Those are all things that really are designed to distract us from the discomfort of the stress that we're feeling. And so there are actually statistics about what periods like what we're experiencing right now can do to us. People that got quarantined when the SARS outbreak happened had much higher rates of depression and PTSD. The stock market crash in 2008 led to higher rates of suicide. And then if you lose your job or your insurance, that definitely has terrible impacts on your health and your mental health, because you may have to make choices about getting things taken care of that you would rather not have to make. So, you know, I know that a lot of these concerns can seem theoretical, but I have thought a lot about what are our rates of PTSD going to be for people who are on the front lines when this pandemic is over. I can't imagine what it is like right now to work in an emergency room, or somewhere where, you know, or to be a first responder, you know, going to pick up people to take them to the hospital. What is that going to do to the mental health of those people? And then what about the mental health of our children who are, you know, having to be kept at home and maybe old enough to understand that, you know, this is not normal, and it can be very traumatic. So there's that to think about as well. So sometimes we can have a real disconnect between what our brain is telling us and what our body is really doing. And so I'm going to show you a couple of things from clients of mine that shows that disconnect. So this is somebody who said to me, I'm not stressed. And yet her cortisol pattern on the Dutch test, which is the test I use in my practice, shows this massive cortisol spike that there's about a 2-hour time lapse between waking and what we see. So this was actually when she woke up. So she's got this huge cortisol spike. And when I talked to her further, it was like, oh yes, I wake up, my heart's racing. You know, I've got palpitations, I'm anxious. And you look over to the right and you see all of this in the red. And this just basically is an illustration that her axis that goes from her brain to her adrenal glands that deals with stress is just all on hyperdrive. And yet she doesn't feel like she's stressed. So, you know, this is an actual representation of what's going on in the body and not what's going on in her head. This slide is a representation of what happens when somebody is telling me they're not stressed, but their body is saying something completely different. And so this person has a huge cortisol spike when she wakes up, and on further, you know, discussion with her, she's like, oh yes, I'm very anxious when I wake up. I have heart palpitations, and I feel really jittery. Well, as it turns out, she had a daughter who had an illness last November, and it was serious. She had high fevers, and this mom was really worried about her. And so it has caused her a degree of PTSD around this episode. So I think this just goes to show that this may have happened in November, but it does build up on itself, and it can still, even in March, be having deleterious effects. So this is like the polar opposite of that. So this client said to me, oh no, I'm fine. She's running 2 restaurants. She has special needs twins who are 18 and have seizures that she has to manage. And she also shares custody with her ex-husband. And she ended up having to shut her restaurants down because of the pandemic. And so they were still open when we did this, but as you'll see, her cortisol pattern is completely flat. And so she has absolutely no reserves to be able to deal with any kind of stress. And so our job, hers and mine together right now, are to help her figure out how to carve out more time for herself, which is a whole lot easier than it was, you know, 6 weeks ago. But to really support her nutritionally and with rest and good self-care. But again, she thought she was fine. So how do we know if somebody has a flat line of cortisol? Well, they're barely able to get out of bed in the morning. Foggy brain is another major sign of that. Mood disorders can be a problem, as well as burnout. When your cortisol falls to that kind of level, it stops being anti-inflammatory, and it allows things like joint pain to really begin to show up, because you don't have the cortisol to help keep that inflammation down. And then you can be subject to recurring infections, and salt cravings are one of the things that are a sign of this. When you have an overactive one, sugar cravings are the predominant craving that you might have. So how are we going to take care of this? I'm going to give you 3 stress busting practices that actually have science behind them to help. And then I'm going to give you a bonus 4th one, because this is one that I do that is really, really helpful. So I don't know if all of you have heard of earthing or grounding. This is basically where you go outside and you find grass or bare earth, and you either put your hands in it, or you walk barefoot, or you can even lie down. And obviously you want to pick a place where it's not dangerous to do this. And you just feel yourself connecting with the earth. If you don't have an outside place to do this, then you can also do it. There are earthing mats that you can get to have at home to do it. But the most effective way to do it is on the actual earth. Another tip is meditation, and I'm sure that this won't come as a surprise to anybody. I read a book recently called Stress Less, Accomplish More. I have no interest in accomplish more because that's how it got me into stress more. But I really liked her method of meditation, and it's called the Ziva Method. Emily Fletcher was the author of this book. And I liked it because it's basically 15 minutes twice a day of meditation. And she gives you a structure for how to set it up so that you're not, just sitting there trying to clear your mind, because according to her, that's not really the objective of meditation. You can't ever really clear your mind. So I really enjoyed that book. And then there are a million different deep breathing exercises that you can try. And this one that I listed here is called box breathing. But there are numerous different counts you can use for the inhale and the exhale. You can do alternate nostril breathing, which is basically breathing in through one nostril, breathing out through the other. This is one, I had a friend of mine say that she would do this in her car and she got all kinds of strange looks, which I certainly can understand. And then the bonus stress buster is gratitude journaling. And the way I do this, you can do it at the beginning or the end of the day, is to get yourself a journal that is just dedicated to this, and then write down 5 things that you're grateful for every day. And I think it's really important to do that, at least during this time, because sometimes it's hard to find 5 things that you're grateful for when things are so crazy. But it does train your brain to begin looking for those things during the day. And then lifestyle practices that support your HPA axis, which is the axis from your brain to your adrenals. Nobody ever wants me to tell them to limit caffeine and alcohol, because that's just so not fun. But alcohol can be really hard on the adrenal glands. The other thing is, there are so many reasons not to drink. It increases your risk of breast cancer. It can increase weight gain. It interrupts your sleep. So there are lots and lots of reasons. Caffeine is like a high interest loan for your adrenals. So it gives you that shot of energy, but then you also get that crash later on. So, it's challenging, and giving up caffeine can be hard. So the way I did it was to gradually mix in decaf with my regular coffee, and got it down that way. And I'm at about 80% decaf and 20% regular now. My husband refuses to give it up completely, and so that was the compromise that we came to. A second tip is to eat enough protein. And when I say enough, that means about a ½ ounce per pound of body weight. If you're more active and athletic, then you may need more than that. And if you're more sedentary, then you may need a little bit less. But a lot of women don't eat enough protein. So like for me, that would be aiming for, 65 grams a day as a goal. And this is something that you can actually track in MyFitnessPal if you're not sure about how much you're getting. But just sort of as a rule of thumb, a 6-ounce piece of salmon would be about 35 grams. A 4-ounce piece of chicken is about 30. So if you just kind of keep those in your head, an egg has 7. So there's some easy ways to kind of keep that in your brain without having to track it, because a lot of people don't like to do that. And then sleep, of course, is important. And, I have so many people that say to me, well, if I could sleep, I would. And I understand that, as insomnia has been my own little piece of perimenopause and menopause hell. So I am quite familiar with insomnia. I tell people that I don't think I've had a good night's sleep since my daughter was born, and she is 32. So it's challenging. But what I tell people when I'm working with them is at least give yourself the container to have 8 hours of sleep. So, you know, don't go to bed at 1 o'clock in the morning and wake up at 6 and expect to feel refreshed, because it just doesn't happen that way. So what I recommend is, you know, giving yourself a 10 to 6 window where you can sleep and at least have the opportunity to do that. And then limit your screen time. Now, I don't know about you, but I have something on my phone that tracks my screen time. And what has gone on in the last few weeks has just been horrific from an increase in screen time. And I really have got to figure out a way to put the phone down, because A, it's not doing anything good for my mental health. B, it's wrecking my eyesight. And C, I just don't need to be, you know, scrolling through Facebook all day long. All it does is get my blood pressure up. I'm sure that there are probably a few of you that feel the same way. And then exercise. Exercise has lots and lots of benefits for mental health. And if you suspect that you have a low cortisol issue, it really should be gentle exercise, just because you don't have the physical reserves to handle high intensity workouts or, you know, hour-long spinning sessions. And, you know, I've had some clients who had really, really low cortisol, and they were like, yeah, I'm going to CrossFit 4 times a week. And I said, well, how do you feel after your workout? And they would tell me that it would just wipe them out for the rest of the day. And if you're experiencing that, that probably means that you need to take a look at the kind of exercise you're doing and whether or not your body actually has the ability to sustain that. So let's talk about supplements. So the B vitamins, B's and C, B vitamins and C are foundational for helping support the adrenal glands. If your cortisol is low, you definitely want some big doses of B5 and C, along with your protein and your sleep, because those are the 4 building blocks of adrenal healing. Adaptogenic herbs are great. There's probably 8 that I can think of right off the top of my head. My personal favorites are ashwagandha. I love holy basil because it's calming, and you can actually make tea out of it. It's Tulsi tea if anybody wants to try that, and it tastes good. And then I like to use rhodiola for my clients that need more energy, because it can be energizing for some people. Now, for some people, it's too energizing, and so they have trouble sleeping if they take that. But all of the adaptogens are designed to help smooth out your cortisol, whether it's high or low. And then my new personal favorite supplement combo for bedtime, because I have tried them all, is it's a liposomal spray that has a mixture of GABA and L-theanine in it. And GABA in a liposomal formulation crosses into your brain pretty well, and it hits the same receptors as Xanax does without the nasty addictive qualities that go along with that. And then the L-theanine is very calming. So I love that combination. It's worked really well for me in combination with magnesium, as well as an adaptogenic herb blend. Magnesium I recommend to almost everybody. Our soil is very, very depleted of magnesium just from farming practices, and it's calming. It helps if you have restless legs. It helps if you have heart palpitations. It's great for a lot of things. And then chamomile and passion flower are 2 things that are herbal that I like as well. Chamomile you can actually get as an essential oil if you're interested in trying that on the bottoms of your feet at bedtime, or you can put it in a mister thing. God, I can't remember what that's called. Anyway, I have one. It basically goes for 2 or 3 hours and nebulizes the essential oil into the air. Diffuser. There you go. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about the immune system. And the reason your immune system is important is because cortisol suppresses it in the long term. which I mentioned earlier. And in a situation where we have viruses to fight, it is very important that we have the best immune systems that we can possibly have. And so the main organs that are involved in the immune system are the bone marrow, the thymus gland, the spleen, and the lymph nodes. And then something you may not know is that about 80% of your immune system is housed in the gut and is significantly affected by the balance of microbes that you have there. And so if you've got gut issues like constipation or diarrhea or bloating, we'll get into more of that in just a minute, but those are indications that your gut microbes might be out of balance. And that's important because we don't want to have a situation where things that are supposed to stay in your gut leak out into the rest of your body. That's called leaky gut. Some physicians don't believe that that actually exists, but I've seen enough people with lots of inflammation and hormone imbalance, and that it's a thing. And then skin is also an important piece of this because it's the barrier that's keeping out all the bad things. So how do you know if your immune system is working correctly? Well, we don't typically think of fevers and hives as being good things or inflammation, but those are signs that your immune system is actually working. So I've been reading a lot during the pandemic about ibuprofen. Was the first thing I stumbled across because there was somebody that posted something about ibuprofen and how it could worsen COVID-19. And I couldn't find any definitive evidence that that was actually true, but in my functional medicine class, the instructor was like, well, why do you want to have ibuprofen to suppress a fever? A fever is your body's way of doing its thing against the virus. So, there's kind of two schools of thought about, do you suppress it? Do you not? Do you just let it go? How high does it need to go before you do something? And all that kind of stuff. Hives are a histamine reaction. So that means that your body is reacting correctly in a situation where you have something that you're allergic to. Inflammation is another sign that it's working. And then if you don't get sick easily or you recover quickly, then you know that you have a good immune system, more than likely. And if it's not, well, then you end up with autoimmune issues like Hashimoto's thyroiditis or rheumatoid arthritis, things where your body turns on itself. You can also become immunosuppressed if your body and your bone marrow aren't able to mount an effective response against some sort of invader, or your bone marrow has failed and it's not able to produce the cell lines that it needs to fight infection. And this can show up as illnesses that just drag on forever, or infections that just keep coming back. You have wounds that don't heal well, or you may just feel really tired and just kind of chronically inflamed. So I like to talk about gut health, as you may have noticed just a second ago, because in normal situations, the immune system promotes the growth of normal balance of microbes and helps maintain a stable community in your gut. And there are millions and billions of microbes in your gut. I can't remember what the weight of the microbes is in your gut, but I think it was like 4 pounds. So it's a lot, and it's a big variety of things. And when it gets out of whack, the opportunistic or pathogenic microbes are allowed to grow, whereas in normal circumstances, your microbes that normally live there are keeping those the bad bugs suppressed and under control. And so leaky gut, as I mentioned before, is about allowing molecules to pass through the lining of your intestine. And this sets up a situation of inflammation and really causes a lot of damage to your immune system. So I mentioned earlier some of the signs that your gut health is off. Reflux is another one that I didn't mention. inflammatory bowel disease, irritable bowel disease, whether it's constipation or diarrhea predominant. These are all signs that something is off. In midlife women, it can also show up as new food sensitivities. So we think of food sensitivities typically as, you know, an allergic reaction, but what you may not know is that anxiety and fatigue can also be signs of a food allergy. And so there's testing that can be done to look at the balance of microbes and also to look at food sensitivities. I have a test that looks at 132 different foods and spices to see, you know, what you may need to eliminate. Maybe not forever, but long enough to allow your body to stop having the reaction to it. So in order to support our immunity, there are also lifestyle changes. And I wrote a recent blog post on this. If you haven't visited my website, it's drannaggarrett.com. Breaking up with sugar is a great first step because sugar in and of itself is inflammatory and we don't need more of that. Here comes alcohol again. So alcohol in and of itself is an immunosuppressant. And so in times where we need to mount a good, robust immune response, drinking a lot of alcohol is not going to help with that. And then movement, again, is really important, as is sleep. And then we want to make sure that we're eating real nutrient-dense food. I don't need to, you know, expound on this point. I think, you know, everybody has heard this over and over and over again. And, you know, we all have plenty of time to cook now. So I'm excited to see the new generation of cooks that comes out of this. And then washing our hands is, of course, super important. So the theme of these things for stress and immunity is moderate your alcohol use, sleep, and eat well. And that is the theme of this would probably contribute to about 80% of your success. I've gotten a lot of questions about supplements, and this list is not comprehensive. These are the things that are involved in cellular processes that contribute to a strong immune system. Melatonin can help with sleep. Now, not everybody responds to it. There are some people that are genetically wired so that they don't respond to melatonin no matter how much you put in. So if you're taking 10 milligrams a night of melatonin and it's not working, it's probably not going to. But what you may not know is that it also helps regulate the immune system. So it minimizes the overload of inflammatory mediators that come up with infection. Glutathione is something that you may not hear a lot about either. This is something that I do in my Dutch test. There's an organic acid test to look at the glutathione levels because it's really, really important as a nutrient. It helps support the mitochondria of your cells, which are the little energy factories that live inside your cells. And so if your glutathione level is not as good as it should be, you're not getting the antioxidant and detoxification benefits of the glutathione, which in turn helps support the immune system. And then zinc, which you probably have heard a lot about, you can't find it anywhere right now, helps promote the growth of T cells, which are one of the lines of white cells that help prevent damage from free radicals. And then vitamin A is another one that's heavily involved in immunity. This is one that is fat soluble, as is vitamin D. And so it's best to be taken with a meal that contains fat to absorb it well. Vitamin D is kind of a funny one. It's associated with increased autoimmunity as well as an increased potential susceptibility to infection if the levels are too high. So what we really want is to see a level somewhere around 50 to 70. Once you get above 70 for a long period of time, it starts to suppress the immune system. If it's below 50, that is not ideal, and thus you may not be getting the immune boosting protection from that. Now, the challenge here is that when you have a vitamin D level done, the upper limit of the normal, or the upper limit of normal is 30. And so if your level is around 30, your doctor's going to go, yay, it's great, keep doing what you're doing. But what you really want is to have it around 50. So a rule of thumb for that, if you have test results and it's low, let's say you were at 30 and you wanted to get to 50, it takes about 1,000 units to go up 10 points. So if you needed to go up 20 points, you would need about 2,000 units. And that's just that's a general rule of thumb that you can kind of use to think about that. And then vitamin C also helps a lot with infection and immunity. It also is something that's a little bit hard to find right now. I was looking for a client the other day in Wellevate, which is a portal I use where you can get any supplement on the planet pretty much. And I was going through all the vitamin C's and they were all out of stock or all on back order. So I was able to find one the other day, but you may have to look around a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about thought work, because the way you think about what's going on in the world right now can really impact how you experience this and come out on the other side. And one of my favorite sayings, and I don't know who said it, one of my colleagues when I still worked at the hospital had this hanging in her office, and it's thoughts are not things, even the ones that tell you they are. And so I think that's important to remember. So what do you most need right now? As I mentioned at the beginning, I asked this question in the Hormone Harmony Club, and these were, the first two came up so much more often than anything else. I put in medical marijuana and more progesterone just for fun, because I know at least one of you on this webinar said, yes, I've considered medical marijuana to get me through to the other side of this. And then more progesterone is something people are always asking about. So, you know, I'm just happy to be able to provide a space for you guys to connect today. And I know it's not the same as seeing your people in real life, but hopefully it helps a little bit. And if I could help you deal with uncertainty, and I'm going to give you an exercise to do to help with that. But if I knew the answer to when is normal coming back, I don't know the answer, and I don't know what normal is going to look like when it does come back. So I think we're all just in the middle of this sort of grand experiment where we see what life is going to be like, and hopefully we'll remember what's important to us as we go forward. Okay, so this is the exercise, and this is similar to some of the things that we'll be doing in the Resilience Reboot class. So there's a book called Emotional Equations, and it's by a guy named Chip Connolly. And he basically takes different emotions and goes through and makes equations out of them. And the one that has been the most beneficial for me, and especially when I'm coaching people, is the one for anxiety. So anxiety is a product of uncertainty, which we have lots of, and powerlessness, which we also have a lot of right now. And so for that reason, it has really ramped up everybody's level of anxiety. And if you're in my group, you know that the baseline level of anxiety is pretty high as it is, but you layer this on top of it, and it just has really, really brought it to the forefront. So here's what you can do. This is step one of the exercise, and it's to make yourself a sheet with 4 columns and write down everything that you know, everything that you don't know, what you can influence, and then what you can't actually control. And usually what comes out of this is that you have more that you do know and that's in your control than you think you do. So, you know, dig deep and really have a good think about that. And then the second step is to give yourself basically a box to worry in. So let's say it's 15 minutes a day. You know, worry about everything that you can possibly worry about in that 15-minute period. And really think in the extremes of, oh my gosh, what if X, Y, and Z turns out to be the worst case scenario, and let yourself really go there. And then for extra credit, you can multiply the uncertainty and the powerlessness times the severity of the consequences of that particular situation. And, sometimes you'll figure out, it's really not worth worrying about. And if something is out of your control, then my personal suggestion is to just let it go, because there's nothing that worrying about it is going to change. I read something in a coaching group I'm in yesterday where these two women would go and walk together, and one of them was just going on and on about how her husband was going to lose her job, and the friend's husband was going to lose his job, and what should they do, and blah, 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 blah. And neither of them knew that either husband was going to lose his job. And, really, what do you say to that person? You say, well, I'm choosing to focus on the things I can control and to let the other things go. And if he does lose his job, we'll deal with that when it gets here. And so this is just a quick exercise you can try to see if it helps bring down the level of anxiety. So it's important to really think about your mindset, because, I don't know what your experience in life is, but mine has been that you get more of what you focus on. And so if you're constantly focused on the negatives and the what ifs, you are likely to continue to notice more and more of that. And that's not helpful at all. So one of the things I have suggested to clients in the past is to just notice your self-talk and write down what you're saying to yourself that's negative on a daily basis. And I think that you might actually be shocked at how often you're saying negative things to yourself or about yourself. This is one of the techniques I use in my weight loss classes, to have people journal this, just so that they can see, what they're allowing to come into their brain and live there. So maybe you can think of something right now that you're constantly saying to yourself that needs to change, and maybe that's the first thing that you change. And, if you want in the Q&A part, if you know that there's something you're saying to yourself and you want any coaching on that, I'm happy to do that. So just some general reframes for negative thinking loops. The first one is that I'm open to the possibility that X, Y, and Z. And I love this and the next one too, because it takes a negative feeling, and when you can flip it around to be an I wonder if it's possible, or I'm open to the possibility, it feels so much lighter. If you can just be curious about a negative thought that you're having. Another one I saw this week was, I've survived 100% of my bad days so far. Yes, we all have. Everybody that's here has. This too shall pass is another one. It's just a season. We'll get through it is one that I didn't put on here. If you're having a negative thought, you can ask yourself how that thought is actually serving you. And then looking for the next best feeling thought. So one of the things I'm going to teach in the Resilience Reboot class is a technique called Self-Coaching 101. And it's designed to get you to just that next best feeling thought. Because if you have something negative going on and you try to leap to the best possible feeling thought you can come up with, your brain is not going to believe it, and it won't help you. So I didn't know exactly where to throw this in, so I just kind of threw it in at the end. And these questions actually work for just about any numbing behavior. So when it comes to emotional eating, the first question you ask yourself is if you're hungry, and if the answer is yes, then you eat something, preferably healthy. And if the answer is no, then you ask yourself, what is it I really want right now? And this is where this can work for any of the numbing behaviors. So if you're thinking about having that third or fourth glass of wine, what do I really want right now? And the answer is usually not another glass of wine. It's usually you're bored, or you're sad, or you're lonely, or you're angry. And really identify that emotion and work with how to fill that particular hole rather than using a numbing behavior to try to fill whatever is empty in you. And then the last question is to ask yourself if this is the kindest thing you can do for yourself right now. And usually the answer is no. So, will you create or react as we go through this? And the choice really is up to you. You can use your mindset to help you be in creator mode versus reactive, because reactive is an exhausting place to be. And so when you're in creator mode, you can ask yourself questions like, what feels like love to my body right now when you're making food choices or exercise choices? You can look at detoxing your environment. You can add more pleasure in. You can spend more time in the present moment, because it doesn't do any good to look out into the future, because none of us know exactly what that looks like right now. So if you want to go deeper into this with me, I have created a 4-week class that is all on Zoom. I've got handouts and exercises to give you a chance to practice all of the things that we talk about. We'll have our own Facebook community. We'll have challenges. They'll be recorded in case you can't join live, because I know that can be an issue with some people. And then you'll have access to it forever. So once we get past this, you'll still have the toolbox that you can go back to be able to experience the program again. And so for right now, it's going to be $397 until the end of April 29th, and then it'll go up to $447, and that can be split into 2 payments. So in week 1, we're going to go deeper into cortisol and go from chaos to calm. We're going to learn more about the effects on the body. We're going to talk more about stress relieving practices, and you'll have a chance to practice those and come back and talk about your experience with it. We'll talk about nutrients and the nutrients that stress depletes and how best to care for your adrenal glands during stressful times. And then we'll get much more into the herbal solutions that go along with that. And then in week 2, we'll do a deeper dive into immunity. And this is where we'll really get more into gut health and how that is impactful. More about herbs and cellular support. So that will be week 2. And then week 3, it sounds like a weird name, but week 3 is what feels like love. And so we'll talk about the one question that leads you to make the best decisions you can make at this point. We'll work on moving mindfully in ways that feel less transactional to your body and more like love, and how to add more pleasure. And then we'll talk about the science behind mindful eating and how that can help with stress and improve your nutrition as well as your joy. And then in the last week, we will talk about Self-Coaching 101, and we'll look at the gifts of slowing down and look at the practices and habits that you develop that can help serve you long past the pandemic. Talk more about anxiety, and then really look at what's important to you and how to create yourself a roadmap to move forward. And I also have a VIP option that includes 2 30-minute coaching calls with me that you can save till the end of the year. It is $597 till April 29th, or $647 after that. And our classes are going to start on May the 7th. So that is a Thursday, and they'll run through May the 28th. And we're going to do it at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So even if you're working from home, at least if you're on Eastern time, you can still probably join in with us. But like I said, they're recorded, and you don't have to miss a thing. So thank you for spending time with me today. I'm going to go to the chat box. Okay, does anybody have questions, comments, thoughts? If you do, you can unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat box. Y'all so quiet. Question about vitamin D. My levels were super low. I take 5,000 units a day. How often should levels be checked? Becky, I would say after you've been on it for 3 or 4 months, it should definitely be checked again. Some people have issues with absorbing it, so that can be a problem. But if you've been on it for several months, I would go ahead and look at getting it rechecked to make sure you don't need to go up on the dose. So vitamin D is one of these, is a fat soluble vitamin, and those are A, D, E, and K. And so what that means is they can be stored in your body, whereas the other ones, if you take too much, you basically urinate them out. So D is one of the ones that gets stored, but it's really hard to do damage to yourself until you get chronically or long-term over 10,000 units a day. So some people just require higher doses. And then Becky, if you can be out in the sun, that would be helpful. I know you're in Ohio, so that's been a little bit of a challenge because spring is just now getting there. But yeah, feel free to email me if you have more questions about that. What brand of GABA do I use? So I use the Quicksilver brand of the liposomal spray. Designs for Health also has one, and they both have the same amount of GABA and L-theanine in them. What is the Dutch test? Hannah, the Dutch test is a urine test for hormone balance. And so it looks at the levels of sex hormones. It looks at a deep dive in cortisol. It looks at some of the organic acids for B vitamins, glutathione, some of your neurotransmitters, and melatonin. And so basically what it allows me to do is look at your hormone levels, see the metabolic pathways that your body is using to eliminate those, and then look at their relationships to each other and come up with a plan to help you manage any issues with hormone imbalance you may be having. Is the test to test cortisol levels different than the Dutch test? No, Arella, it's the same one. Although the cortisol piece of that can be split out from the sex hormone levels, and you can just do cortisol. And it's, I think that test is $125. This is just the cost of the test kit. $125 for the adrenal part, and then the whole test kit with sex hormones is $250. Will we need to do the Dutch test before class? No, you don't have to do the Dutch test at all. Or if you want to do that, you certainly could. Depending on, so Sarah, if you're interested in that, email me and let me tell you basically the timing of all that, and let's see if we can get it done before the class starts. Right now, I mean, it takes about 2 weeks for me to get it back, so it would be tight, but that can be done anytime. Esther, back to work. Sorry, thank you. Humor and laughter are important. Yes. Is the Dutch test helpful for postmenopausal if symptoms are much better? Becky, I would say if you are much better, unless you're having an issue that you suspect is related to cortisol, it's probably not going to tell you a lot more than the one we did before. But if you're having new or different symptoms, then it may be time to retest. Lori, thanks for the presentation. And increase my energy level, reduce weight, and reduce abdominal fat. I feel like hormones have increased abdominal fat and have definitely gained weight. So Lori, if your doses of hormones are off, and I don't know how they're being followed, whether it's blood or what, that can increase abdominal fat. The other thing that increases it is high cortisol levels, because your body thinks that it's going to need every calorie it can get to fight whatever stressor you have in your life at this point. And so it stores the fat around your middle. So it sounds like you still may have some imbalance going on. Faith, hi Faith. I'm sensitive to medications, especially herbs. Could it be a gut issue? Yes, it could. You know, the gut health is so intricately related with hormone health. And you may have some sensitivity to herbs. Like I know if people have not, sensitivity to nightshades, which are eggplants and tomatoes, and I can't think of all of them, ashwagandha is actually a nightshade. And so if you have a sensitivity to that particular class of foods, then you may be sensitive to ashwagandha. But sometimes, you know, ladies, this is as much trial and error as it is anything else. And what works for one person may not work for another. And like I've had clients that have taken rhodiola and found it to be very, very stimulating, where I've had other people that just are like, oh no, it's great, I love it. Same with ashwagandha. And so we don't always get it right out of the gate. And the great thing is I work with you until we do get it right. So I've never had somebody who couldn't tolerate any of the herbal things. And I've got people that are allergic to grasses and things like that. So we just keep working on it. Anybody else have a question? Well, I appreciate you being here. I will be sending out the link to the recording tomorrow. So somebody unmuted. I'll be sending out the link to the recording tomorrow in an email. And I also have a self-care assessment in there for you guys to use. You can use it to just kind of see how you're doing in different areas right now. Or if you decide to join the class, you can kind of use it to follow along and see how you're improving as we go. So I put that together. I meant to get it to you before this, but it didn't work. Can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, you can. It may not come out tomorrow, but I will make sure that happens. Yes, good question, Sarah. I'd actually thought about that too. All right, well, you can feel free to email me at info@dranngarrett.com if you have any follow-up questions that pop up. I hope to see some of you in class when we get started May the 7th. And you just have no idea how much I appreciate you being here and being part of our community. So thank you so much, and I will see you later.